Hi, this is Mr. Mullaney. This is our lesson recap of the growth of nationalism. Before I go any further, let me just recognize the elephant in the room, which is that the lighting on me today is terrible. I look like a ghost. I get it. There's nothing really. I tinkered. I'm over at the middle school in 309. It's 7:30 in the morning. The sun is bright, and I guess it's messing up everything. So it is what it is. I'm just going on. All right, growth of nationalism. When we talk about nationalism today, we're talking about devotion to your nation, but we're going to emphasize it in the thinking more of yourself as a member, as a citizen of the United States, as opposed to merely a Pennsylvanian, merely a New Yorker, merely a Georgian. This is going to be a process that plays out until the end of the Civil War and aftermath. However, it's starting to really kick in 1810s, 1820s. And you get a president, James Monroe, who during his two terms, one party dominated politics. There was a really sense of optimism, and there's not much disagreement. There's no two sides like we have today and like we have through most of American history. So we call that the era of good feelings. All right, 1817 to 1825, Monroe's two terms, the era of good feelings. So some things to advance nationalism and the thought of yourself as an American and the supremacy of the national government. Dartmouth College versus Woodward. It says that the state cannot interfere with private contracts. It protects business from regulation. And there was a panic in 1819, but that helped to stabilize the economy. The National Bank is a second one is created after the first one expires. If you want to see it today, you can go to 4th and Chestnut in Philadelphia and see the actual building that housed it. Now, remember, the Constitution does not mention creating banks. All right, so this is not really the Jeffersonian interpretation. This is more the Hamilton loose construction interpretation, but they were going with it. Okay. Now, Mcculloch versus Maryland. That was a lawsuit about, it goes to the Supreme Court saying that the National Bank is unconstitutional. Remember, it's not in the Constitution. However, Article 1, Section 8, this is what the justices cited in saying that the Congress does have the right to establish a bank. It says that they can make laws that are necessary and proper. And so some might argue that it was necessary. You can argue that it was proper. Either way, that's, for instance, we have NASA, all right? They couldn't conceive of a NASA back then. So how is NASA constitutional? Well, it's proper. We had a national interest in exploring science and learning more about the universe and whatnot. And so therefore we can have a NASA. It's because it's proper. It fits under Article 1, Section 8. All right, regulating commerce, Gibbons versus Ogden. This is a really important one. So this guy, Ogden, had an exclusive contract with the state of New York to operate a steamboat line between New York and New Jersey, Hudson River. Okay, Gibbons says, hey, I want to start on the same route, and he sues. Gibbons wins. Gibbons is the second there. He's the interloper. How does he win? The Supreme Court rules that that's interstate commerce. That involves New York and New Jersey. So therefore, only the national government, only Congress can regulate that, not a state government. This ruling advances nationalism and it advances federal authority, the authority of the government. All right, the Rush-Bagot Agreement, reduction of warships on the Great Lakes. Remember, our neighbor to the north at this time is Canada. Canada is a colony of England. So it's really England who's our neighbor. And so the idea was let's reduce the amount of warships so that we can decrease tensions. And then you get the Monroe Doctrine, still in effect, not always honored. Falkland Islands, you can look that up if you want to know. So the Monroe Doctrine says that the U.S. would not interfere with Europe, which was like a joke. We had no chance of interfering with Europe. And by the way, later we would interfere with Europe, World War I and World War II. Anyway, however, to stay logically consistent, you have to say that because then you say, no more colonies in the Western Hemisphere, Europe. If you try to colonize in the Western Hemisphere, we will view that as a hostile action. That's a huge doctrine. It's still in effect to this day. Then we watched this is the Jacksonian video from Tom Ritchie in South Carolina, who's a great social studies teacher with great content. We watched the part of his video that had to do with the election of 1824. Here are some notes about that. You have John Quincy Adams, the guy who's eventually going to win. He heavily influenced that Monroe Doctrine, by the way. He was a Federalist, but then wound up basically being a Republican because they all were, and he was kind of open-minded. He was mostly a diplomat. Henry Clay with his American system, Harry of the West. He wanted to have internal improvements. He wanted to have a tariff. This is all big government stuff. The Jeffersonian Republicans, those that were really true to Jefferson, must have hated that stuff. Then you have William Crawford. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. Really, the elites in Congress wanted him. However, he has a stroke in 1823, so he's kind of out of it. But remember, in 1824, this is a different day and age. You can be a viable candidate for president even if you're kind of medically incapacitated. And then you have Andrew Jackson, old hickory, up from the bootstraps, grows up poor, leads the Americans to their greatest military victory ever at the Battle of New Orleans. So Jackson wins the Electoral College, but not a majority. You need a majority to win. He wins a plurality. And he wins a plurality of the popular vote as well. So therefore, you have to go to the House of Representatives. Speaker of the House is Henry Clay. He's one of the candidates. However, he's out of it because he's not one of the top three. He's actually the bottom. He's the fourth. The top three go to the House of Representatives, where they vote by state, even though they're the proportional body. It is what it is. It's a system. Okay. Clay, very powerful in the House of Representatives. He throws his support to Adams, and Adams wins, which, as Tom Ritchie points out, he has every right to do that. However, something happens after that. Adams makes Clay the Secretary of State, and Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, becomes president. James Madison, Secretary of State, becomes president. James Monroe, Secretary of State, becomes president. John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State, becomes president. So it seems like Adams has just said, hey, Clay, thanks for the support. You'll be the next president. And Jackson's supporters, who had won most of the votes, the plurality of the votes, but now are denied the White House, they say there's a corrupt bargain. And if we look at the map real quick, look at Jackson's support. It's the most broad. It goes all the way down to Louisiana and your deep south, to the Midwest of Illinois and Indiana, to Pennsylvania, to South Carolina. Whereas John Quincy Adams really was a regional candidate. He, picked off a couple electoral votes here and there, but really he was a northeastern candidate. And so you have your corrupt bargain, and the Jacksonians are very, very outraged with both Adams and Clay and at the result of this election. And I wonder what the backlash will be. We'll get to that later, but that's our recap of nationalism, growth of nationalism. Thank you.